The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel as written to us by Mark. Jesus said to the crowds, "This is how it is with the kingdom of God. If a man were to scatter seed on the land, and he would sleep and rise night and day, and through it all the seed would sprout and grow, he knows not how. It does it of its own accord, and the land yields rich fruit. First the blade, then the ear, then the full grain in the ear. And when the grain is ripe, he wheels the sickle at once, for the harvest has come." Then he went on, "To what shall we compare this kingdom of God? What parable can we use for it? It is like a mustard seed, that when it is thrown in the ground, it is the smallest of all the seeds on the earth. But once it is sown, it springs up and becomes the largest of plants and puts forth large branches, so that the birds of the sky can dwell in its shade." With many such parables, he spoke the word to them as they were able to understand it. Without parables, he did not speak to them, but to his own disciples he explained everything in private. This is the gospel of the Lord. So we'll try to do what it says Jesus did to his own disciples. He explained everything in private. I know this isn't very private, but you're certainly the disciples. What we have in the first and third readings today is the development of what is clearly Jesus' strategy for change, for growth, for development, for how things happen. And it's very much different than most of us would expect or even want. It's been called the mustard seed conspiracy. You see, what humans prefer is things big, showy, heroic. Now, let's admit it, we're all impressed by famous people and rich people and people who live in big houses and drive big cars. Apparently, God isn't. Because he knows real change, real growth, and real holiness happens in a very different way. Now, let's start with the first reading that Jesus clearly is aware of when he teaches this parable. In the prophet Ezekiel, it says, it pictures the largest tree they knew of, which was called the cedar of Lebanon. They're still there, huge trees in the mountains of Lebanon. And he says God will take a sprout from the top of the cedar of Lebanon and he will bring it down. And he will plant it as a little sprout. And will be this little sprout, in fact, that will do God's work. You see, people who have power, by and large, have nothing to say or cannot be trusted unless they have made journeys of powerlessness. Those of you in the 12-step program know that. It's the first step. Until you admit that you are powerless, you don't understand or recognize or know where your power really comes from. You think it comes from you. And so you try harder to gun your engines and to prove that you're strong and willful and heroic. But then, you see, brothers and sisters, it's still all about you. So in the mustard seed conspiracy, great things don't start at the top. They start at the bottom. And so he goes out of his way to say that this quiet development, growth, change happens almost secretly, almost invisibly, step by step. Those are the people you can trust. That's the trust you can allow and recognize in your own life. I think most of us would want to be more heroic and showy, but in fact, that's not how growth happens. It's trusting that God is working change in us day by day, hour by hour, night by night, and day by day. In fact, the man never enters the scene except the beginning and the end. He plants the seed at the beginning, comes back to wield the sickle and the harvest, but in between, it's all God's work. It takes such humility and patience to trust that even today, God within you is working. It's always an inside job, from the inside out, to move you toward deeper love, deeper faith, deeper hope. All you can really do is allow it, trust it, and once in a while recognize that in fact it is happening. It's probably not the easiest way, because it allows us constantly, or tells us constantly, to let go, to trust that God is in charge and we aren't. And then, as if to make the point in two different shapes, he says, to what shall we compare this kingdom? It is like a little mustard seed, the tiniest of all seeds, although it really isn't, but he's making his point. When it is thrown into the ground, it slowly does its work. Brothers and sisters, I hope this allows you not just to be patient with yourselves, but with your partner, with your children, with life itself. Most of us don't feel very important, do we? Most of us feel like we are just a little mustard seed of a life that God is hardly noticing or hardly caring about. And yet, this is the promise that this is how God works. Even with you, even with you, even with you, even with me. This plants us in a much more realistic garden. A garden where God is in charge and we are not. And then he goes on to say that inside of this world, the birds of the sky can find shelter. People can find a love they can trust, a life that is believable, a hope that is built on something real and not just fancy words. You are such people. We all feel insignificant. We all feel little and of no matter. Most of us wish we could be, perhaps, maybe you don't, I hope you don't, more important or more showy. But most of us are not Pope Francis, are we? We're just one little part of the body. And it is that way that God is slowly changing the world. Isn't it mind-blowing when you think that apparently the universe has existed for 13.6 billion years. Maybe our planet a mere 5 billion years. And God has been waiting all that time. You have to say, who is this God? He certainly is not, she certainly is not into quick results. And must be so patient with all of our backtracking. Look how long we had to wait for a Pope Francis. God put up with all kind of other popes in between. But this week he's going to issue, I'm sure you've heard, it's supposed to come out Thursday. I'm going to get up early and go to the internet and see his new letter on climate change. A lot of people are very afraid because they know that he talks straight. And he's probably going to tell us some things about what we're doing to this planet that we don't want to hear. But he must also recognize, again, this amazing patience of God. That what it took God 4 billion years to create in terms of this planet, we've been able to largely undo in a mere 100, 200 years. And so the question always is, are we going to join God's mustard seed conspiracy? Do our little bit to change this world that without grace, without growth, without God, without holiness, without love, is frankly going downward, not upward. So let's be a part of the upward movement, the movement that offers its little bit to slowly, beautifully change our world and change our planet.